Hello everybody, welcome back to Digital Learning Day and this presentation from CET, Public TV in Cincinnati, on 360-degree videos and STEAM education. I'm Gary Greenberg, Director of Educational Technology from CET, and it's really terrific to see you here and share some of this information about these immersive video environments and their use in STEAM education. As you can see, there's a URL up for live Q&A. It's a Google Doc. You can go to that and you can send in questions at any time. So in terms of what we're going to look at some of the definitions of VR, virtual reality, and 3D media. We're going to take a look at some new STEAM lessons that we've developed at CET in a partnership with Xavier University. We're going to examine some of the teaching issues with 360-degree video, and then we're going to entertain some of your questions too. If you want to look at some of the video that we're talking about here, you'll need the YouTube Google Player app on your phone and a 3D viewer if you want to view it that way. And of course, when we're talking about 360-degree video, we're talking about video that's like a panorama, except it actually is a whole sphere of video around the camera, so it's kind of interesting content. You may have seen it in 2D on a screen. You may never have experienced it in a viewer before, so we hope you take the opportunity today. Just a quick glossary of terms. What are we talking about when we talk about 360-degree video, immersive video? Well, they're all part of this virtual reality technology that we've been using for a long time. When we say immersive VR, we mean immersive virtual reality, something that includes all your senses and gives you a sense that you are there, that you're present in another place. 360-degree video, which is sometimes called spherical video, is a subset of the VR technology. And we'll talk a lot more about that kind of video. Sometimes you see the term AR, or augmented reality, and that is when we overlay graphics or a computer world on the real world, so we can see both. And this term mixed reality is something similar to augmented reality. It's a term Microsoft came up with. They use it a lot when they talk about their HoloLens device. It helps to start with a little VR history, and here's just 1 minute on early VR research from the last 40, 50 years. So there you see a quick synopsis of some research that was done in VR over the years. You can see the linking theme there through all those years is this incredibly attractive headset technology, which is true today. We still have this kind of dorky looking viewer technology we put on our heads to view this stuff, but that may change too in the future. This is a definition of immersive video. As I was saying, it talks about sensory immersion in a virtual environment, including a sense of presence, so you are there sense. And advantages of this media for teaching and learning, we think that simulating environments, virtual field trips, that kind of thing, virtual cockpits, virtual spaces are one way of doing it when you have places that are a little too difficult to visit, too dangerous, too dirty to visit. It's also being used for communication across distances. That's what Mark Zuckerberg has in mind when he thinks about 360-degree video in video conferencing. And also lots of possibilities for journalistic and documentary storytelling. In terms of barriers for teaching and learning with this technology, well, you are kind of isolated when you put these viewers on your head. That social isolation is a factor. And no haptics, which means you can't really have any sense of touch in these environments, for the most part. 360 video, as I said, looks like this. That's a shot in Cincinnati that we did for a project on the geometry buildings. Some advantages of this technology for educators using 360-degree video versus some of these other ways of making a virtual environment. Well, it's the low cost. We like that. We know that it can be viewed without viewers, without the headset viewers for young children, so it can be viewed on devices like iPads and Chromebooks, and it can be viewed on these devices at school where we have access to them. The cameras are relatively inexpensive to shoot with. In science education, having this sense of depth, this third dimension, can be useful in understanding three-dimensional phenomena and exploring things in 3D. We're thinking about layers of rock, molecules, motion, three-dimensional motion, three-dimensional buildings and architecture, three-dimensional environments in the natural world. So our partnership with Xavier University this year, we've worked on creating 5 sort of exemplar STEAM lessons using 360-degree video. And there are these 5 on the screen. They're K-12, as you can see. Geometry buildings is the one I'm going to go to in a little bit of depth here. But there are 4 others there that are pretty interesting, all aligned to Ohio standards, all use the 5E learning cycle that you may be familiar with in science ed. And those 5 stages of the learning cycle are engage, explore, explain, extend, which our Xavier University prof appended with engineer, and evaluate. So far we've found that engage and explore seem to be 2 good places where 360 video seems to help us a STEAM lesson. This is the way engage is described in this learning cycle, that teacher or curriculum task helps students become engaged in a new concept through the use of short activities that promote curiosity and elicit prior knowledge. The explore stage, which comes right after engage, it talks about a common base of activities, exploring a common base of activities within which current concepts and especially misconceptions of students' processes and skills are identified by the teacher, by and large, and conceptual change is facilitated, getting away from some misconceptions students may have about the science concept. So our K lesson here, the geometry of buildings, is an interesting one. The first one we did together. If you want to find this on your YouTube app, you can search this term, 360 geometry of buildings, in the app. You can put it in a viewer, put it in cardboard mode by pressing the little 2-eyed icon in the lower part of the screen, and you can view it the way we meant it to be viewed. This geometry of buildings lesson is aligned to Ohio learning standards in math, for example, identify and describe shapes, basic shapes. But we're also aligned to other standards, science standards, Common Core standards, ISTE standards. We're even aligned to visual arts standards here in this lesson. The objectives of the lesson, it's pretty ambitious. We want students to identify basic 2D shapes and their orientations, identify flat shapes as 2D versus solid, the language that's used for 3D shapes. And it goes on. We want to identify basic 3D shapes, describe and compare the 2D components of 3D shapes, combine simple shapes to form larger shapes, and use shapes to create a model of a building of their own design. So here's the engage stage. Here's how the lesson starts off with the geometry of buildings. The teacher reads a book called Iggy, Peck, Architect. They talk about buildings and architecture, what architects do, and they start talking about some simple shapes and what those simple shapes might have to do with building things and also with the rest of our world. And then we talk about what shapes they might have found most interesting in the book. They make a list of shapes on the board. Then we go to the next stage, and this is the explore stage. Here's where we begin to use our 3D video, our 360 video. You can see some shapes in the upper corner there. What the teacher does is has the student watch the video once and find a building they'd like to look at, watch the video a second time, and take a screenshot of the building that you like, a freeze frame. Then they're going to start creating a model of that building using some pre-shaped cut shapes like paper squares. They're going to glue these pre-cut shapes onto paper to make the shape in the building that they found. When they're finished, they're going to share that out with their group and look at their neighbor's shape that they picked in their building and start asking some questions about shape and position in these buildings that they found. Then the next step is this explore stage where they're going to start looking at some magnetiles and start making the comparison between the 2D shapes they just found and modeled in paper versus 3D shapes, which they can begin to model in the magnetiles. Teacher's going to ask them to think about, for a square shape, for example, is that really the way a square building looks in real life? Can you walk into a two-dimensional square? How can we make buildings have space inside for people? So the teacher challenges the students to show with magnetiles in their bins the shape of their building. Then we go on to get more involved in explaining 2D and 3D shapes. Students share their magnetile model building with their groups. They begin to discuss the difference between a flat shape on paper and a solid shape or a three-dimensional shape, which gives you spaces to work and play. They discuss, have you seen any of these shapes in buildings before, these 3D shapes? And their exit slip is to draw one flat shape and one solid or three-dimensional shape. And finally, in this engineer phase here, stage, they're going to be challenged to do a little designing. In groups, they're going to discuss what people in your neighborhood need in a building that they don't have yet. What kind of building would people in your neighborhood enjoy? What kind of building could you help people build in your neighborhood? They begin to plan with some drawings the kind of building they'd like to have. They draw a model of their best building idea. They try and model it with magnetiles, and then they share their building drawing with their neighbor. Then finally, in the evaluate stage, they even try creating some three-dimensional versions of these buildings themselves using something called a 3D doodler. These extrude plastic, soft plastic, and if you can make a Eiffel Tower the first time out, you get a free workshop from CET. It's a lot tougher than that, but you can make some interesting 3D shapes, squares and basic shapes, and put them together and give it some dimension. After you create your model, you tell the group what you think's good about it and what could be changed next time. You do a little improvement round. And then in the evaluate stage, students make a quick video description of their building project and share it out with their partners in the group and with the teacher. Now, we're also going to be developing a wind energy lesson, which will involve wind farms in the Midwest. This is going to be a high school lesson. It's going to work with these science standards, work in power, conservation of energy. It's the next gen standard alignment. Here's design, build, and refine a device that works with given constraints to convert one form of energy into another form of energy. We're currently shooting in a wind farm, so we're shooting some 360 video in the blue well, it's a wind farm in northwestern Ohio. In the engaged stage, students will look at this video and think about how a wind turbine works. They're going to be moving towards actually creating their own design for a wind turbine. So if there's a design process involved, they're going to iterate on their design, and they're going to explain how their turbine works to others in their group using appropriate terms and terminology. This use of the explore phase and the relevance of 360 degrees videos is important. The idea that in this explore phase you would be investigating a phenomena seems important to us in doing this lesson design. Observing and investigating phenomena are key ideas in the next-gen science standards. So if you have a data set that is 360-degree video and you can dig into that, and if there's enough detail in that video that you can make careful observations about the phenomenon, that's going to be great. And we think that will give STEAM a lot of energy for students in terms of exploring patterns, observing patterns, working on their observational skills, developing their cognitive and physical abilities to gather data from that video. Here is that certificate code that you will need in order to get credit for this workshop. Don't want you to forget that. One of the things we have to think about in all of this is it worth it to do 3D video? Is all this work going to yield what we need? And it probably has to do with how important that visiting that environment is, how difficult it would be to take a real field trip there or get that experience to your kids any other way. Because obviously making one of these 360 videos is some work. There are guides to help you do it, something called a spherical production guide. YouTube has one as well as Google has one. Some general tips from producers. Let the user control the motion of the camera. Don't forcefully move that camera because it can make the viewer a little dizzy. Your story matters. You're using first-person perspective to tell that story, so the camera is the person's view. Using available VR assets, finding other VR materials, maybe 360 views where you can on the web. But there's a lot of potential for both teachers and students to get very creative and involved in this technology. There's that bit.ly for questions again. If you want to get in touch with me, there's my contact information. We hope you'll consider developing one of these 360-degree videos and using it for your STEAM teaching and learning. Thank you.